This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into SportsDay Insider presented by the Dallas Morning News. I am Kevin Sherrington, joined by my pals Evan Grant and Lia Assimakopoulos, our Stars/SMU beat writer. She does it all, and we're going to have her on to talk about the Stars and a big story she just wrapped up about the House settlement, which has I guess, officially legalized schools paying their players. You know, SMU legalized that back in the 80s, actually, Leah. But,
actually, they didn't legalize it. They just did it.
They just did it, yeah. That's why the famous thing they say now about NIL means now it's legal.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
They were ahead of the curve.
First, Leah, yes, they were ahead of the curve, way ahead of the curve. Firstly, we want to talk about the Stars. She's out there. She's in the Stars parking garage as she is doing this, getting ready to go in because it's the start of free agency today. So, Leah, kind of give us first a little timeline here about how everything starts and how it's going to work starting today.
So NHL free agency opened Tuesday. The Stars made the bulk of their moves heading into free agency, signed some of their key players to extensions like Captain Jamie Benn, forward Matt Duchene, and really returned a lot of their core already in terms of players like Mikko Rantanen, Wyatt Johnston, Jason Robertson. So didn't really have a whole lot to do heading into free agency, but have a couple spots to fill out and to finish out their roster. So that starts from here.
All right, so I don't want us to bury the lead here. Leah,
because they had one big thing to do in free agency, Kevin, right?
What's that?
Hire a coach.
Hire a coach would be good. It's been a month, and now all the reports are that the Stars are bringing back Glen Gulutzan, who's already been a coach here once for the Stars. As a matter of fact, one of Jim Nill's first duties when he took over as the GM in 2012 was to fire Glen Gulutzan, saying that he was a quality guy, quality coach, but he was going in a different direction. So, Leah, we are kind of standing on ready on this also about when the Stars are going to have a press conference. As we are taping this on Tuesday, we don't know when they're going to make an announcement. You believe that probably Wednesday at the earliest at this point. So tell us a little bit how you think this has all come about and why this has happened and why it took so long.
Yeah, it's been a very bizarre process, and the Stars are kind of known for, keeping things very quiet in general within the organization. This is not a massive hockey market. It's a little bit different than if you're in a Toronto or a Boston, and they were the only team that is searching for a head coach. So it's not like it's not like they have to rush it to beat other teams also searching and looking at similar candidates. So they've really taken their time. It's, been almost a month since they fired Pete DeBoer. But over the last couple of days and weeks, it seemed like, a couple finalists started to emerge. Glen Gulutzan, as you mentioned, Neil Graham, who's the Texas Stars head coach in the AHL, was another candidate who many considered to be a finalist, but it seems like they're going to go back to Gulutzan. All signs are kind of pointing to that. Nothing's been finalized yet. We're still waiting for that press conference, as you mentioned. But it seems like they want to give him another shot. His first NHL job period was in Dallas over a decade ago. He was here for 2 years, got fired when Nill took over as GM, and later went on to coach in Calgary. Didn't have great success there either, but has had a lot of success as an assistant in Edmonton for the last 5 years or maybe even more, working with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl running their power play. Pretty much turned that power play from the worst in the NHL to the best over his time there. So it looks like they're looking at that time in Edmonton and his connection to the Oilers, who obviously have beat the Stars and eliminated them from the playoffs the last 2 years, and they're hopeful that he can be on the other side of that next year.
Now, when we were talking before the podcast started, you said that there was some talk up in Edmonton that perhaps that the Stars have been trying to hire Gulutzan for a while now, not necessarily as a head coach, but just to bring him back and to have him in the front office.
Yeah, one of the Edmonton broadcasters I heard was on TV this morning and saying that there may have been some interest over the years in bringing him back to Dallas. Not sure about the specifics of that, but it seems like, he's a candidate they've had their eye on, and that's kind of how Jim Nill operates. When he fired Pete DeBoer, especially a coach who led them to the Western Conference Finals 3 years in a row, I'm sure he didn't do that without his eyes on somebody. I'm not sure if that was Glen Gulutzan from the beginning or if it was someone else who maybe didn't want to come to Dallas, but he seemed to be a name that they were interested in from the start of the process, and he's got a connection to the franchise and has been here before. It is a little weird. I mean, it has happened in sports before and in the NHL where they rehire someone who was previously here. It even happened in Dallas when they brought Ken Hitchcock back when early on in Jim Nill's time here. So we'll see. But a lot of time has passed. The organization's in a very different spot, and it will be different than when Gulutzan was here the first time.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, yes, it has happened other times. Usually when it's happened with a coach or a manager who's had great success.
Right.
Like as Billy Martin with the Yankees, or with Phil Jackson of the Lakers, or as you mentioned with Ken Hitchcock. The only Stanley Cup they won was with Ken Hitchcock. Now, is my understanding that that might not have been Jim Nill's idea so much as Tom Gillardi's, but I guess maybe that was Jim Lights still around then? I'm trying to remember if that was Jim's idea to bring back Ken Hitchcock. But it's easier to sell that, right? You can sell that with someone. You might say, well, he's too old for the job now, or it didn't work out or whatever. But when the guy hasn't had any success as a head coach and you're bringing him back, this just seems to be flaunting it a little bit with the fan base. This is like saying, it also seems to me to be saying that one of the complaints about Pete DeBoer was obviously he threw Jake Ottinger under the bus after the loss in the Western Conference Finals, and then one of the things Jim Nill said afterwards was, well, that was part of the reason for it, not all of it. Have we ever gotten to the bottom of what that all of it is?
Not from Jim Nill directly, but I mean, yes, the Jake Ottinger thing was part of it. I think it was just kind of a for me, it kind of dates back to early in the season. I think with Pete, it was just a handful of things of, not really taking accountability. There was even small things like the Stars got fined for having a practice on a day in the holiday break when they couldn't. And like Pete kind of refused to take accountability for that. When they lost 7 games in a row, it was very, at the end of the regular season, it was kind of just brushing it off of, this isn't a big deal. We're just making excuses for things. So I think those little things played into it. And I also look at it as just they felt like they needed a change. I mean, the same thing happened 3 years in a row, and I think Jim Nill is pretty confident in the players that he has and the roster that he has to win a Stanley Cup, and felt like he had to change something. But that's where this head coaching decision is kind of interesting, because you have a coach that does have such a great resume and so much success. Yes, he hasn't won a Stanley Cup final in Pete DeBoer, but he had been there twice. He showed that he could get close to it. You think that if he's going to fire him, he's going to bring in somebody who's proven to do that before, and obviously Glen Gulutzan isn't. So it's interesting, and maybe Jim Nill sees something that the rest of us haven't.
I think one thing here, Kevin and Leah, for me is you look at the timing of all this, and clearly it may have just been a part of it when the way DeBoer handled Ottinger in the end of the playoffs. But you're at the end of the playoffs, you're one of the last 4 teams remaining. And so a lot of teams have already started to move on for their 25-26 plans. So your pool of really bright young stars is not as great. Secondly, if you've got plans to go further, and I think hockey is more liberal in this than other sports are, but do you want to entrust your team to a guy who's going to make mistakes the first time around, or somebody who has already made those mistakes and hopefully learn from it? And so I think you wanted to look for a veteran coach with this team. I guess the big question for me is, has the time with Edmonton been successful enough to make you think that this is a guy who has matured and is ready to really really take over as a head coach.
I think one of the things that and just reading across the board about this was that people are saying that, Gulutzan is the kind of guy who, very humble, very relatable, a really smart guy. Ken Hitchcock called him a brilliant coach, a guy who's learned his lessons along the way and is willing to adapt to things and adapt to different personnel, different teams. He's not going to force the issue with anybody. One of the things that struck me, Leah, during the season was, and I can't remember which player it was. It might have been Ottinger, who was talking about their system and what they were doing, and he talked about how Pete DeBoer had pounded it into them. I thought pounded was like an interesting word to use. It made it feel like what he was saying was, yeah, we're not doing anything instinctively or by reflex. Everything we do has been just pounded into us. It was an interesting choice of words. So I'm wondering if one of the things that Jim Nill is looking at in a Glen Gulutzan in this case is, well, first of all, I think it's saying that coaches don't matter, right? I think that basically that if I got the players and the right players, I just need to let those guys play and maybe a little more free flowing type of atmosphere, a little bit like when Rick Carlisle was coaching the Mavericks and Jason Kidd became his point guard. And basically Jason talked him into saying, hey, give me the keys of the offense, man. Not so many scripted play calls here. Let us get into a free flow here. And that's what led them to win a title. And Carlisle has talked about that even this year, with the Pacers and talking about how he learned that lesson. And maybe that's a little bit of what, Glen Gulutzan offers here. I'm not saying it can't work. Obviously, that's ridiculous to say that. It just doesn't feel like the right thing to do. I mean, I just don't see people going back into their history and bringing back a coach who didn't win. And you fired him pretty quickly for that. And then when he got and everybody talks about, well, yeah, that was a bad time. Tom Hicks was still the owner of the team. They were in bankruptcy and all these issues. And yes, I get all of that. But it goes to Calgary and the same thing happens. They don't win.
Yeah, I'd correct you on one thing, Kevin, there, that people do bring back coaches who lost in that place previously, but then they went on and had great success somewhere else. I think that's happened.
Can you name me one?
Occasionally.
Can you name me one?
No, I can't off the top of my head, but I think you just
wanted to say you wanted to correct me, Evan. That's all you wanted to do was try to correct me.
Correct. That's correct too. But yeah. Lia, I mean, I think Kevin's point right here, it's the pendulum effect that we've seen in every sport that, you have a guy like Pete DeBoer. And again, we talked about the tipping point with the Ottinger incident. And all of a sudden, what's the reaction? Well, we've got to get more of a player's coach. Right. And then then the team inevitably gets a little undisciplined. We've got to get a disciplined guy in here. Is that your read on this? That right now it's got to swing more towards quote unquote player's coach?
100%. Yeah. And that, I think that even without Jim Nill coming out and saying those words directly, like the actions that he's shown in the last couple of weeks here, even just leading up to free agency, for example, he said the other day during the draft that this wasn't going to be a year where they went out and targeted any big names in free agency. They were looking at this as we want to retain the core that we have. So he pretty much has said, we're confident that the players that we have, this is a team that can win a Stanley Cup. And, you may agree with that or disagree with that, whatever, but he pretty much said the coaching and the leadership, that was the problem. That's what needed to change. And Pete DeBoer was not really a player's coach. He never felt that way. And the Jake Ottinger tipping point incident kind of showed that as well. So yeah, they want to go out and get somebody who maybe is more of that, or maybe, is going to be a little bit less of that, kind of let the players lead in a sense. And I think one thing they like probably about Glen Gulutzan is the relationship that he had with players in Edmonton. I mean, Connor McDavid and him have been very close, and he's known for having that relationship with the Stars in Edmonton. And Dallas is kind of in a different position now, bringing in Mikko Rantanen. The identity of the team is changing a little bit to be more superstar driven with him coming in, and maybe they see it can be something similar here. I don't know. But yes, I think a player's coach and just kind of a different identity. They said they wanted a different vision, and he's definitely a different vision from Pete.
All right, let's talk a little bit now about what they've already done in free agency and what they've done with their own players, and kind of give us an idea, Leah, of the guys who were they've already re-signed, the guys that look they are not going to, and what that says to you about what they're trying to do going forward.
Yeah, so I mean, they bring back Matt Duchene and Jamie Benn, and to me, those are two of their big leaders, two guys that are kind of getting up there in their careers. Jamie much more than Matt, but they. To me, that is, we have a new head coach. We want some continuity in terms of the leadership group and who has been the core of this team these last couple of years. So both of them are back. Matt's back on, I believe it was a 4-year deal. Jamie just on a 1-year deal for $1 million. And they traded Mason Marchman away. That was another pretty significant move to clear up some cap space, which they needed to do because they had probably the least cap space in the league to work with. They kind of put themselves in a difficult spot after the Rantanen signing at the trade deadline. But most of their extensions were kind of done during the year. They extend Jake Ottinger, they extend Thomas Harley, Essa Lindell. So there wasn't as much work to do in the off season. They extended a couple depth players and Nils Lundqvist and Maverick Bork earlier in the off season. But the players kind of expected not to come back, or Cody Ceci, Mikhail Granlund. Those are guys that they added at the trade deadline to try to kind of get them over the edge, win the Stanley Cup this year. Obviously, that didn't happen. But those are two players that, 8 really big minutes for them. They contributed. Granlund had a hat trick in the Winnipeg series. They just were too expensive for them. And that's kind of a tough spot for Dallas is, they make great moves at the trade deadline every year, but don't really have the money in the offseason to retain players. So I guess we'll see what they can do at the start of the season, but it feels like they're going to have to make another big move at the trade deadline to bring somebody else in like they did with Rantanen.
Yeah.
Kevin, let me just go back to my correcting of you for a moment, please.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Let me give you one example in baseball, the sport that I'm most familiar with. A fellow named Bobby Cox managed the Atlanta Braves from 1978 to 81. He was fired, went to Toronto, had some success there. You know where he ended up his career?
Texas Rangers.
With the Atlanta Braves. In hockey, which I'm not very familiar with, I believe John Tortorella got his coaching start with the New York Rangers and wasn't very successful. Went to Tampa Bay, was very successful. Then he went back to the Rangers. Thank you. So that's
two examples.
Now back to our show. I just want to prove you wrong, and now we can go on.
Evan, if you would work that hard covering your beat, trying to make points, you've been a Pulitzer Prize winner. But see, you're just until you get the opportunity to try to show me up,
That's my sole motivation in life, Kev.
Yeah, pretty much. Okay. Leah, we appreciate your hockey expertise in bringing us up to speed on all that. Now, before we let you go, though, we wanted to talk about
we want to change on the fly, Leah. We want to change. We're going to change on the fly here.
All right. And we're going to talk about the story you did for us, in which you talked to several athletic directors in the state about the House settlement was finally passed or ratified or whatever we want to call it from I guess that Judge Claudia Wilkin had to sign off on it was the deal.
Yes.
And so that's been going on forever, years.
Yes.
That this thing has been worked on. And this just shows you why college athletics, which moves at warp speed, and so that's why it's so difficult to wrap, any kind of, your arms around it and try to slow any of this down. That's not going to happen. And we'll see what this does. But give us just a brief overview of what is going to happen now with this House settlement and what it means.
Yeah, I mean, college athletics are really never going to be the same again because of this. The whole debate with NIL and players earning off their name, image, and likeness was kind of transitioning from the amateurism, traditional days of college sports to players getting paid, and now they can be paid directly from their universities through revenue sharing, which a lot of people feel is long overdue. These players are the ones that are making millions of dollars for these universities every year, and now they're going to be entitled to a portion of it. But there's a lot of rules and regulations that are going to go in place to make this work. It really turns college athletics into a pro sports kind of environment where there's going to be a salary cap of $20.5 million for all athletes to be paid across all sports at each university. And a lot of football programs alone were already paying their football players upwards of $30 million a year. Obviously, that is a lot more than the $20.5 million cap that now has to be spread between football, basketball, baseball, all sorts of sports. So it's going to cause athletic departments to have to budget differently, and really have to budget for the first time, because it's been collectives that have been running these payments to athletes. It wasn't the university athletic department themselves. So it's just kind of a new responsibility for them, and changes a lot in terms of recruiting and the transfer portal. And the NIL system kind of got out of hand, where players were just being offered millions of dollars to leave their school, and it was a bidding war. And now the goal is that that won't be the case anymore. But players are going to have to take pay cuts because of it, because of this cap. So a lot is changing. But a lot of athletic directors I spoke with said they feel that it's is kind of long overdue, and that there'll be some sort of regulations and kind of a system in place to help guide them, when it's really been a free for all the last few years.
So, on all the reporting you did and talking to people, the new athletic director at TCU, Mike Buddy, it is Mike Buddy, right?
Yes.
He one of the things he said to you was that that some of these football, I guess he meant football players, were getting $50,000 a month, and to think about that. And to think back to the days in the 80s when I was covering Southwest Conference football and basketball, and of course back then the Southwest Conference had a reputation as the Wild Wild West, and there was all kinds of things going on, and everybody at one point or another, every school in the conference was on NCAA, either being investigated by the NCAA or on probation. They were all turning each other in, but I can remember back then that there was some money involved in the annuities, and of course Eric Dickerson supposedly got the Trans Am from Texas A&M and drove that to SMU, where he played for the next 4 years. But I can also remember one of A&M's basketball players, when they went on probation, it was because they had given his mother a washer and dryer.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a real evolution here, where players were getting from these collectives $50,000 a month, and that's at TCU.
Right.
What in the world were they getting at places like Texas and Texas A&M?
I know. It's crazy. I mean, I think a lot of this, of course, wasn't public. And even though some of these are public universities, a lot of that information was never out there, the specifics of how much these players were actually making. And to hear a number like that of, even like a basketball player making $50,000 a month, and now having to adjust to a lifestyle where that's not going to be the case. It's just kind of crazy how out of hand this seemed to get, and how much money was just being spent on these athletes. So I think that is why there's somewhat of a sense of relief from some athletic directors. Of course, the ones that were paying the top dollar feel like they don't have that competitive edge anymore. But in a sense, it's almost like we're going back in time in college athletics, where now recruiting is going to come down to, sure, how much rev share you're going to get, that's a piece of it, but the money is going to go towards facilities. And if you're a program that can raise that this much money, like a Texas A&M, you might not be able to just pour that into your players, but it's how recruiting used to be. Just because you can't throw millions of dollars at a player doesn't mean that you can't still benefit as an athletic department. That was a point that Mike Buddy made of, yes, it's different, but these top Power Four programs with all this money are still going to have a competitive advantage in a sense. But it is crazy what it got to, and it's going to be interesting how they regulate it, because I think athletes got so used to making that amount of money, and obviously they're not going to now. And you got to assume some people are going to try to beat these new rules somehow. So I'm sure there'll be the NCAA will be getting involved there when it comes time for that. But yeah, definitely different, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Of course, that is the issue, right? How do you police this? I mean,
Yeah.
we know what the problems were before with the NCAA trying to police programs, for the last, I don't know, 100 years. And occasionally they would get somebody and make an example of someone, like they did at SMU, a small private school that they gave the death penalty to. So you know, what's happened in the past is that, usually you had to have another university turn somebody in. That was really the only way for the NCAA to find these kind of things out. First of all, I don't even know. I mean, does the NCAA still have an enforcement staff that does that kind of thing? I mean, I don't know if you ultimately are trying to police this. Do you turn back to the NCAA to just give the NCAA a little more power? Because we've seen that power ebb, right? We have seen how conferences like the Big Ten and the SEC, they just run everything. They do whatever they want to do, especially in football. There's to the point where they've talked about we may just divorce ourselves from the NCAA altogether and just run our own show. So how? I mean, I'm wondering in the end, how is this going to be policed, and how can they possibly do it?
Yeah, I think the full extent of the policing is still kind of unclear, but I think the NCAA at least is trying to think about some of the ways that teams are gonna or schools are gonna go about, trying to beat this new system. They did put in place a new kind of regulatory system for NIL deals because I think their thought process was, okay, well, there's this cap in place, so teams are gonna just work with third party organizations or collectives and kind of circumvent the cap that way. So the consulting firm Deloitte is running this new system called NIL Go, where basically any NIL deal above $600 now has to be approved to make sure that it's in good faith and at fair market value, and that they're essentially not going around the cap and just schools paying players indirectly. So they've thought about it, and they've put some protocols in place to prevent things like that. But college sports can get messy, and I'm sure athletic departments are going to get creative. And at that point, I don't know what happens, and I don't know if they're going to be made an example of, or some schools are going to just get away with it. It's going to be interesting to see, but yeah, I don't. It's such a new thing, and I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a mess for the first few years. I think another difficult part of it is the amount of front loading that happened, where recruits were brought in and have already been paid all this money up front. So the cap isn't even really going into effect until a couple years down the line, because there's already been recruits that have been given millions of dollars. And that's okay because it was all before July 1st. So it's not going to totally fall into place for a few years, but I think these athletic departments are at least trying to make these adjustments now, knowing that at least next school year they're going to have to really follow under that cap.
Well, it's all going to be very interesting, and at least it's the first step. But I'm like you, these people who got front loaded, and then what happens when they decide next year? Yeah, I'm out of here.
Exactly.
I've taken my money and running literally to the next school. So it'll all be very interesting to see how this develops. Lia, thanks for coming on and talking to us about the Stars and about this very interesting stuff with colleges. And we are in a wild new era in college athletics. There's no question about that. And we'll see where it takes us.
Thank you, Lia.
All right, there goes Lia. Lots of stuff happening with the Stars, and we'll be keeping you up with all of that, and we talk about it some more next week even. But now we're going to talk about the Rangers. My gosh, Evan, 4 extra inning games in a row, tying a club record. They've lost 3 of those games, and in a couple of those games, as on Sunday, Corey Seager hits a big home run that ties everything up. Very dramatic late. Adolis Garcia Monday night hits a big 3-run home run, ties everything up. Very dramatic. Once upon a time, say, 2023, those 2 people hit big home runs that led to big things for the Rangers. In 2025, those were 2 losses. It's just amazing.
Well, it's just what this team is. I mean, it refuses to take runs when they're given, and they swing for home runs, and they do hit some occasionally. But look, the 2 games were lost on Sunday and Monday when they had opportunities with runners at third base and less than 2 outs to simply get a run home and have a walk-off win. And on both occasions, they failed. And listen, I know Josh Young is going through a terrible time right now, and it may ultimately end up with a demotion to AAA. I wouldn't be surprised if that's on the docket before the end of the week. But Jonah Heim on Monday night, he had, I think, 6 opportunities this year with a guy at third base and less than 2 outs and had delivered on 4 of them. So he had been about this club's most efficient sac fly producer, or most efficient guy in sac fly situations. And he struck out. And I just, last night and the last 4 games in large part have really, again, I think been exceptionally damning on what this team is. It's got a lot of really good parts. The bullpen, unfortunately, I think the bullpen may pay a price now for how it's had to work over the last 4 days because of the offense. And I think we saw some of that on Monday. But the bullpen has been great. The starting pitching has been great. The defense has been great. The offense has been wasteful, inefficient, and ultimately, it's this team's biggest flaw. The only thing left to be determined is whether or not it's this team's fatal flaw. And I think with every day that passes, you lean towards, yeah, it's a fatal flaw.
Yeah, Evan, and we've talked about this before with this team. We talked about it last year when they weren't slugging like they did in 2023. Was it a mistake to try to load up and just do the same thing again, this year? And of course, it's not like, they went out and got great pieces. I mean, Jake Berger obviously offered you more of that than Nate Lowe did. But Jock Peterson was not a big, home run guy. But I will say this, watching the
Jack
games.
Peterson had a 900 plus OPS against right-handed pitching last year. He did really well in the role he was supposed to be in.
No question about that. But he's not a guy who's going to hit 35 or 40 home runs for you.
Right.
My point is that they're not. It was not that. But watching this team over the last couple of days, it's like in the game Monday night, Zeke Duran comes in as the pinch runner for Higashioka, steals second, steals third. Almost, I think, on consecutive pitches. This is exciting stuff. This is taking advantage of a situation where the pitcher is slow to the plate, and you take advantage of it. And then Alejandro Osuna, who should really be going down sooner than later, gets up there and waves at a couple of pitches in the most unproductive at bat you could possibly imagine. I'm wondering at some point I don't want to play Billy ball here, but at some point, if Osuna's not going to be able to offer you anything more than that, how about trying to squeeze here? Do something a little creative, because what you're trying to do, that was the most defenseless at bat I've seen in weeks.
Well, I think that was a 2-out at bat, and you don't really have much opportunity there to do anything other than that. I think that was the at bat that followed.
Now, Osuna, that was a 1-out at bat, because he was the second out when he struck out.
And they have hang on, Kevin. Let me just go back for a second. Christian, just hold up for 1 minute, okay?
Yeah, because right after that was Haggerty.
Yeah, okay. So I'm looking. Heim was the 8th inning. Yeah, okay. Osuna was the 9th.
Yeah, Osuna was the 9th inning.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's go back to that. How do we?
I said it was the most defenseless at bat I've seen in weeks.
Okay, and then I'll pick up. So, look again. I think this demonstrates a lot of this team's issues. You could have tried to squeeze with Osuna there. I think that I wasn't. I don't recall the Orioles' defensive positioning, but I do remember that. Look, it is a situation where the squeeze might have come into play. And when you're expecting the squeeze, or when you're prepared for the squeeze, it makes the degree of difficulty a lot more different. Osuna had hit a couple of fly balls. He had hit a fly ball well, I think, earlier in the game. But to your point, yeah, you might as well try something because what should be working for this club just isn't. And listen, Monday night, they had a lineup that included a guy, Suna, who started the year at AA, Michael Hellman, who just joined the organization, Justin Foscue, who was in an 0-for-42 going into the game, Josh Young, who had the worst OPS, or the third worst OPS in June. I went back and I looked at the bottom 5 spots in that lineup, and I think that they had a composite batting average of 160 for the month going into the game. And my point is, they just don't have a whole lot of good hitters anymore. That's the bottom line. They don't have a lot of good hitters. They have some guys who can hit home runs. Corey Seager can hit a home run. Adolis Garcia can occasionally run into one, but they just don't have very good hitters. That's the bottom line. We can talk about what this team's expectations were all day, but I think at this point in time, you have to you have to look at the Rangers and say, no, they're not good hitters.
Yeah, this is, to me, at a point, they've reached a point where I would like to see them with an offense that, of course, people like Marcus Semien and Corey Seager and Wyatt Langford and Josh Young, if he ever gets his head right, are the kind of guys that you are counting on to produce, and Jake Berger, guys who are supposed to be hitting home runs. But the rest of the guys better be guys who get on base, who can make something happen here. It's like Michael Hellman steals second base, hits him, goes into the outfield, he comes around and scores. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that obviously you can count on, right? But if you have players in your lineup who make things like that happen every once in a while, who force the issue, and what we've seen in the rules of baseball now, with the number of times you're allowed to throw over to first base, this has made running much more of something that everyone should be taking advantage of.
Well, and they did try to take advantage of it last night. I thought the one thing, and I questioned Bruce Bochy on this after the game, is that when the Orioles lost their DH, because they had to move Gary Sanchez to catcher to replace Chadwick Trump, Sanchez had all kinds of problems throwing, covering the plate. He's not a good defensive catcher whatsoever. And in the 8th inning, when Heim was at the plate and the Rangers had a runner on third with one out at that point in time, I thought it might have made some sense to put Garcia in motion earlier in that at bat and try and more likely force a throw down to second that might have gone errant, or that might have produced the run that allowed the run to get home. Bochy's perspective was, well, we did start the runner. Yeah, but they started him with 2 strikes, and I think that gave Sanchez an easy out there where he could just hold the ball once he got the strikeout. But to these points, I mean, these are low percentage plays. I mean, when I thought about this afterwards, it's like, all right, so you're hoping a guy makes an error here. I know you want to force the issue, and that is smart, but at the same point in time, it's like, that's what you're down to offensively, is hoping that the other team makes an error.
Well, there's no question about that. To me, it's like you're in the lifeboat, and the lifeboat is leaking here, right? And you can talk about, well, gosh, we started out in this great luxury liner here, and look at our big luxury. We started out in the Titanic, and now we're all in the lifeboats, and now my lifeboat's leaking. It's like, you can't be talking about the Titanic anymore. You got to talk about fixing the hole in this little boat. And that's what the Rangers have to do now. They have to fix the hole in their little boat that they're all stuck in.
I don't know if it's fixable, Kevin. I think I've reached the point. We're now past the halfway mark in the season. All of these problems seem to still be in existence, and for some guys, it's getting worse. And I just don't know if it's fixable. I really don't. I've come to the decision that Jonah Heim and Adolis Garcia and Leody Taveras all had career years in 2023. Taveras is gone. You're now in place of Taveras, part of the center field or part of the outfield platoon for Evan Carter has become Alejandro Osuna, who I really like as a player, but I'm not sure he's ready for the big league. So, you add that in there. We've seen regression from Josh Young, which is disturbing. We see Marcus Semien getting older. I mean, he's picked it up a whole lot in June, but he's getting older, and you have to question, how long can he rebound as he has. And here's a stat for you that you're just not going to believe. Coming into June, Josh Young had a 762 OPS and Marcus Semien had a 536 OPS. So Josh Young had a 230-point advantage in OPS entering the month. At the end of June, after Monday night's game, Marcus Semien led him by 20 points in OPS. That is a 250-point turnaround between those two guys in a month's time. And it says a little bit that Semien has really rebounded well here in June. It says an awful lot about just how bad Josh Smith's June was.
Yeah. I want to say one last thing about what we're talking about. Yeah, you're right. I don't know that it's fixable either, but you have to try something. You can't go through the next 3 months just hoping this will all keep coming back. You got to keep trying different things. And I think that Bruce Bochy has tried different things, and he's just going to have to keep trying. But to your point about Josh Young, at some point we have to ask ourselves, or at least the Rangers have to ask themselves, what is causing this? Why all the, now Josh Young has not been great since, there's been a regression going on for a while here with him. It's not just this year. And I know when you wrote a story about that yesterday and you talked to him in which he, admitted, yes, I'm struggling here. I'm just having a hard time. It's me against me. And then you also talked to Brett Boone, and I was very intrigued by some of the things that you said that Brett was trying to get Josh to do and make an adjustment. And it sounded like that Josh was pushing back a little bit against what Brett was trying to do. Did I read that correctly or not?
I think there's been some concern that Josh has been a little bit stubborn in some of his willingness to make changes. And I also know that the older I get, the more I realize that everything is that things that are assets for players also become detriments for players. And listen, the best players do have to be stubborn. They do have to know themselves, and they do have to know what they're capable of doing. But at a point in time, everybody's got to make some kind of adjustment, and you've got to know when to do that. So I think that where Josh is concerned, there's some concern about stubbornness. There's some concern that he's not been able to lay off pitches that are clearly out of the zone and up and in. And as he said yesterday, he's seeing more of them now. So pitchers have identified that as a weakness. I think the other part is this is a guy who is prone to being streaky, which is okay. There are a lot of guys who are streaky, but he also doesn't walk. And when you don't walk and you're streaky, when you're in a bad streak, it's a zero. I mean, it's often a negative impact on the lineup because you can't get on base and all you are is an automatic out.
See, Evan, that's the problem with this team, and I'm sorry I didn't, think of this earlier, but they all have the same profile. When you have a team full of guys got some power, but they don't walk, they don't take pitches, they don't have good at bats, and everybody's like that. Well, then you got a real issue here because then nothing's happening. That's how you win a game 12-2, and then you lose the next three, 3-2. It's just that's not a sustainable deal.
Yeah, this offense functions as a bunch of individuals, many of whom have the same profile, but it doesn't function well when it comes to team-centric, team-oriented at-bats and team-oriented situations. And maybe that is because so many of the players have similar profiles. But yeah, it's a real issue with this club. Now, look, if Peterson was healthy and productive, he is a guy who takes walks, and he does change the dynamic against right-handers some. But this team is defenseless against left-handed pitchers. I think they're now 6-14 in games started by lefties. It's the second worst win percentage among big league clubs. And I don't see a whole lot of progress in all of that.
No, I don't either. Evan Carter has played better recently and shown some spark. I like the way he's kind of handled this situation, but really, when and obviously Josh Smith has continued to be a good player. He kind of has his ups and downs, but that's the thing on a good team, on the 23 team, Josh Smith would be a guy right in the middle of the pack. Nice player to have, good player, not our best player by any stretch of the imagination. And now he is.
He's their best. He's been their best player this year.
Yeah,
he's the most deserving. He and Jacob deGrom are the two guys most deserving of All-Star bids.
Yes, and that's pitiful to say that because Josh Smith is who he is. A really nice player to have. See, that's the kind of thing to me is that it's not that the Rangers need more guys like Corey Seager. They need more guys like Josh Smith. It's easier to find people like Josh Smith than it is to find Corey Seagers. And I think
and listen, here's for me the best way to sum this up is that Josh Smith is a really valuable tool to a championship player as a utility guy because of that versatility. And he could get 500 at bats moving around the field and filling in for injured guys. But I think right now, if you're the Rangers, you have to look at this and say, is Josh Smith a better ball player on the everyday front than Josh Young is? And I think that's where you get to a point where you start, because you're going to have to make decisions about the long-term futures of these guys. Both these guys are going to be arbitration eligible. And, I think I made the point last night or Monday night that to this point, Josh Smith has played as well. He's played well enough to deserve an everyday spot on this team, and to deny him that long term almost is a crime.
Yeah, there's a question about how well he holds up under that kind of load. We have seen that, and we've talked about that before. But yeah, to your point, that's correct. I mean, because now not only is Josh Young not hitting, he's not fielding his position either. He had two plays Sunday when I was out there. One, it was a hard hit ball, but he didn't get down and get in front of it. And then when he tried to pick it up, he bobbled it. It's an error. And then later in the game, play at the plate in the extra innings, ground ball right to him, easy ground ball right to him. He makes the throw to the plate. They get that out. Now, next guy up hits a home run. It becomes a moot point. But that was the question I asked Bruce Bochy after the game, was that, do you think that his struggles at the plate are now affecting him on the field?
Look, I think Josh Young's defensive ability is absolutely fine. I have zero issues with it. But the fact that he's got a hit. He's an average defensive player, maybe a tick above average for me, because I think he does have really good hands. But he's got a hit, and I'm not gonna bench him because of his defense. Let's put it that way. If I bench him or I demote him, it's strictly offensive.
My point was that he is letting this affect him in the field. I've seen plays here. I
don't know. Because I thought this was a kid who was really mentally strong. That was my and it's clear that this whole month has worn him down.
Yeah, there's no question about that. When he told you, you can tell that. So, you can tell by his body language. He's starting to look like Jonah Heim out there with his body language on the field the other day in the two plays that I was just talking about. When you have two plays like that in one game, and in which you also, struck out when there was an opportunity to score the winning run with a fly ball. And as you said, swinging it at a 98-mile-an-hour fastball up and in. What in the world were you going to do with that, even if you got your bat on it?
Yeah,
nothing.
I mean, it's let's put it this way. Here's the question. Not the question. Here is the bottom line. On those pitches, Josh has got to eliminate them. He can't try and make adjustments so he can get to them. He's got to eliminate the swing on those pitches, because he's not going to get there. To get there, he'd have to get on top of the ball. Get on top of the ball, he'd have to stand on a step ladder, for crying out loud.
Right.
And third, he got hit on. He broke his wrist last year on a pitch up and in that he tried to swing at and expose that wrist. That should have sworn him off at that point in time.
It's insanity to me. It's a little bit like when Josh Hamilton, God bless him, when he was great, when he was right, he was great. And he might have been, for that 4-year stretch or whatever it was, the best player in Rangers history. But But it got to the point where, remember, and he was swinging at the first pitch. It didn't matter where they were throwing it. He was swinging at that first pitch. And I remember thinking, if I'm the Rangers, I'm telling him, do not swing at the first pitch for the next 2 weeks. And then they will finally throw you one. Maybe you can swing at. But why in the world would they throw you a strike if they know you're going to swing at that? And it is the same thing with Josh Young. Just what you said. Why wouldn't I just throw it up and in? He'll swing at it, and he looks off balance when he's swinging at it. It is just a pitiful exhibition. And of course, it's not just Josh. It's across the board on this team. Too many guys that will just chase. Adolis Garcia, a champion of that as well.
I will, Kevin, to that point, I will say this. I looked this up yesterday, and I may mislabel this, but this team has the worst whiff rate on fastballs up and in from the right-handed hitters, in the big leagues. Too many guys chase it. Garcia, Berger, and Young are all in the top 30 in the majors. Too many guys chase it. It's like that old line. It's still one of my favorite lines from A League of Their Own, when Gina Davis is talking about pitching to her sister, and she said, who was played by Lori Petty, and she says to the pitcher on the mound, give her the high heater because she can't hit him and she can't lay off him.
Well, that's right, and they can. And listen, I just don't understand it. I don't understand the intoxication level of it that you would want to even try to do it. So I guess let's wrap this up, Evan. We got to go. But what do you think here? Obviously, to me, this team is I've decided this team is a seller. If he wants to sell, I don't know what he can sell at this point. I really feel like, obviously, the one thing you could really sell right now, especially the way he's pitching, would be Jacob deGrom. I would feel like that there is no way in the world that Chris Young wants to do that. I think he's in love with deGrom, and I understand why he is and why he brought him here in the first place, and the thinking that maybe I could put this thing back together and next year and he could lead the charge into the postseason next year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way that I would phrase this, and I mean, we can talk about piece by piece next week, but I don't know that Jacob deGrom or Nathan Eovaldi will ever have more value again than they have now. Now, look, it's a great 1-2 punch, and if you think you can rebuild this team over the course of the winter, obviously you want to have those guys. But I also think that you have to start to consider how much heavy lifting you have to do here for the long term. Because I right now I look at catcher, and I don't think the Rangers have a championship catcher behind the plate, and I don't think Jonah's that anymore. I look at first base, and the jury's still out on Jake Berger. I look at second base, and I see Marcus Semien, a player who's getting older. I look at shortstop, I see Corey Seager, who, has had a hard time staying on the field and may ultimately need to move across the diamond to first base. I look at third base, question. Left field, Wyatt Langford, I think he's fine. Center field, Evan Carter, if he can stay healthy, I think he's okay. Right field, they have question. And so that's a lot of questions to have.
Yes, it is. It is a lot of questions. And I don't, I don't know what the thing to do is in this environment. Because if you trade deGrom and if you trade Eovaldi, those are two big contracts. And so then maybe that gets you down in a range if you do that. And then you're counting on your young guys in the rotation to come back. But the problem with that is that do you really think that Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter are ready to front that rotation? I don't think so. Because Tyler Mahle is of the last year of his deal as well. So you'd be losing your three best starters going into next season. Then you're talking about a rebuild, if you ask me, Evan. I think that if that's what you do, which I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do, but if you're trading deGrom and Eovaldi, then you're essentially in a rebuild, then not in a retooling.
Yeah, I don't know that you can. I don't know that if you trade those guys, that you're able to recalibrate for 2026.
No, I don't think so either. All right, that's going to do it for our podcast this week. On that fun note, we will be back next week to talk about things and see if Chris Young is any closer to making a decision about whether to buy or sell. I can't imagine that he's getting any closer to being wanting to be a buyer. But we'll talk about that some more then, and we'll have some. Maybe we'll even have some stuff from the new manager, the new coach of the Stars. So from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks, and we'll see you next time.